Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/newmusicindustry. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
You're listening to the New Music Industry with David Andrew Weeb.
Today I'm chatting with host of the Unstarving Musician podcast, Robonzo. How are you today, Robonzo?
I'm great. That was like one of the smoothest intros ever because as we were just saying pre-record or pre-episode, we've just been chit-chatting, ice-breaking. I love it. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we just been chatting away. I don't know how many times I've said the intro like that now, but I guess something people wouldn't know necessarily is I've been podcasting since 2009 with the David Andrew Weeb podcast, which quickly turned into the David Andrew Weeb Interviews and Music Business podcast, which then became Dogcast Music Entrepreneurship. And then when I realized that nobody understood the cleverness behind the name of Dogcast Music Entrepreneurship, I temporarily quit and then rebooted. And that's the New Music Industry podcast, which is also the namesake of my book. But it's been an awesome and fun journey. So, and we'll be getting into that too, because you're also a podcaster, but your website makes it fairly clear that you're passionate about helping musicians, especially in the area of live performance. So where does that passion come from, and how did you get started in this space?
Yeah, that's where it started. I am a lifelong gigging musician, drummer, and singer, and I recently, confessed in another conversation for the podcast that I years ago used to play guitar and just stopped and picked that back up. So because I think it's from talking to so many songwriters and I'm like, wow, I'd like to write some songs. So I picked that up as well. But it did come from gigging a lot and being very proficient at it in terms of being I was fond of saying, when I was in the markets where there are the opportunities that I could gig at will, when, where, and with whom I wanted to and get paid doing it. And I guess, the story I usually tell is one December, a while back, I realized my gig calendar had one or more gigs per month in the coming year. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I should maybe share that with some people. And eventually it drove me to write a book called The Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs. And once that was done, maybe during the process, I thought, I wonder, what could I do to make this a little bigger? Because if this does help musicians, surely there's, I can take it to a broader audience. Over time, though, from talking to a number of songwriters, musicians, and industry people, content creators that are in the music space, I'm learning all these other things that we're able to share. I'm able to share, even outside the podcast. So as my new thing I'm fond of saying is I feel like a curator of, expertise and mistakes and new trends that independent musicians want to use. So that's how it started.
What kind of gigs were you playing at the time?
I have always been predominantly like a club, private events, winery type of gig person. There are the occasional, things that I consider a little unusual, like playing at a Google corporate event or a wedding occasionally. But so just getting out and gigging with rock bands, pop bands, dance bands, occasionally filling in for other types of genres. And I guess for me, not every musician, as you know, is of this ilk. But for me, I put myself out there to be a sub whenever possible to grow my network as a musician. So just put myself out there, and that started happening more and more. And before I know it, I have wonderful opportunities to work with 4 or 5 bands in any given quarter, and a lot of them cover bands, and then some original artists. So that's predominantly what I was doing.
Yeah, I think subbing is probably underrated. I used to do that quite a bit as a guitar teacher. And honestly, some of the most fruitful times as a guitar teacher were when I was subbing for, a group of teachers who were working at the same store, Long and McQuaid up here in Canada. And it was probably some of the best pay scale I've seen for teaching. So I'm kind of glad to be out of the teaching space at this point. But I remember those being really good paydays.
Yeah, it's a blast. And, if you're doing your putting in your best, it's so fun to perform with a group of new musicians, rehearsed or unrehearsed. And, they generally make you feel like a superstar if you just go and make them look good. And that's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah. And that's a really great tip too, is to be mindful of the musicians you're playing with and complimenting them.
Oh, totally. And you know what? You also made me reminded me. I have a good friend who's got this monster of a band called the House Rockers. Once upon a time, they were the Silicon Valley House Rockers, which I almost said, but the House Rockers are a like 9-piece band. The guy's a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and I don't think they do any original music, but they are a working musicians band. And many of the guys are full-time musicians, not all of them. So some of those guys sub, quite a bit. In fact, I got to play with one of them, a couple of his side projects. But anyway, back to my friend who leads the band. He really doesn't like it because he wants his guys to be available always 100% of the time, and he's pretty good. I mean, what he's producing for his band and the musicians that play in it is pretty special. The payday is always good, and they really enjoy it. So for the most part, they're probably 99% available, but there's the occasion where they're like, I can't do it. I got myself booked on this other thing. So he really gets a little, I imagine he gets a little tense around the shoulders when I talk about subbing.
I mean, that is the life of a session musician though, right? If you don't have your own band, or if you're just the kind of artist that everybody wants on their record or at their live show, I mean, that's the life. That's the way it is.
Yeah. And, to state the obvious, on top of being a good player and a conscientious player and, listening to the musicians around you at all moments, being a nice guy or a nice gal to those that you work with. And beyond that, just like doing a personal inventory or whatever we call it these days to make sure that we are, because I have my moments where I'm not always the nicest guy, or I get my buttons pushed and say things I wish I wouldn't have. But anyway, to just always be mindful of that too. That took me, just the effort of trying to treat everyone like rock stars and being appreciative and having gratitude for all the opportunities took me so far. With gigging, and that's, that transcends into everything we do, right?
Yeah. I've had Matt Starr on the show, and I remember him talking about the fact that it was so weird, sort of like introducing himself to Ace Frehley or like Mr. Big or whoever it was, and hobnobbing with them and trying to build that relationship so that he could ultimately get the gig. He's like, it's not really the intention. The intention, first and foremost, was to build that good, strong connection and relationship. But I think it's so necessary, right? No matter how awkward or uncomfortable it feels, you just got to be a good hang and be around these people if you want the gig.
Yeah, I think it was my very first or second interview for the podcast was a friend from Texas who's been a working musician, has done some really cool stuff over the years. And one of the things he talked a lot about was, and he used that word, and when he's from spending time in Nashville, the hang. And he said it was all about the hang, and relationships.
Yeah, exactly. It really is. What other kind of tips are you sharing with musicians to help them improve their gigging income?
Outside of improving that, but it is related. Actually, it's very related, is to make sure that whatever projects you're working in, that you're happy with. And if they're not, creating joy, helping you create or realize joy in making the music that you're making, to just take a step back and think about how you can rectify that. Sometimes it means changing the situation. So that's a big one, because, and I share this one lately because I've kind of experienced this in two facets of my life where I was doing something a little longer than I should have. And, but, eventually either by my own doing or by external forces, I am presented with the opportunity for things to change. And lo and behold, when you're doing things that you really enjoy, you're a lot more productive, both financially and just kind of on the happiness scale. And something else I'm really reminded of from a conversation earlier today that I had for Ryan Carella's podcast, which is Breaking the Business. Ooh, well, I'm getting them all mixed up. I'm looking at too many on the pages today. And he, echoed something that I'm really fond of talking about, which is, and you and I have talked about it too prior to, hitting the proverbial record, is content creation.
Yeah.
And how much that can mean for musicians. So he's huge on the idea, and I've advocated it. I don't get as excited as he does, but he's not actually a musician. He's an entertainment attorney, and his podcast is to offer, advice for indie musicians like both of ours. But he was saying how huge it is for musicians to podcast, and also he's super excited both from this year and the coming year about live streaming and what it's doing for musicians to help them increase their opportunities and hence their income. Another favorite, I love the whole house concert thing. If you're in a place to do that, if you play, to me, if you play a guitar or keyboards, you're like totally house concert ready. And I don't care what genre you play, you just kind of semi-acoustify whatever you're doing if you need to, and dig into the house concert scene. And there are a lot of resources out there if if that's something you've just kind of heard about, as you know, and I'm talking to your listeners right now, but if it's something that you're just kind of hearing about, there are a ton of resources, probably on musicentrepreneur.hq.com and certainly on my website where you can learn more about it. And those are some of my favorite, things. Obviously, build your email list. Build your email list. Build your email list.
Good thing to reinforce, because I always end up having to share that same tip over and over, whether it's with coaching, consulting, or through the content that we create here. And what I found really interesting, I guess, is what you said about happiness. I think that's very often overlooked, and I can even admit that at times I've taken on jobs that I was not saying hell yeah to. The old Derek Sivers thing, it's hell yeah or no. Unless you're hell yeah, it's just a no, don't say yes. And I've so many times, like I've had so many lines in the water, as it were. If you're going fishing, sometimes you see those people with their 4 or 5 rods set up with bait on the end because they're just determined to catch something. They really don't care about the sport of fishing. They just want to make sure that a fish gets on one of those lines, and they put as many lines out there as they can. Well, in business or in my various creative endeavors, I've been that guy at times. I think coming to this point, I'm trying to streamline a lot more, but I've been that guy before. That on the happiness curve wasn't always the happiest.
Yeah. And a good thing you bring up about doing things, because the opportunity's there. And it's been talked about a lot of different ways by a lot of people smarter than me, but it is something we have to be careful about. And it's, I think it's not uncommon for us to, no matter how good we are at saying no to the right things, some of us much better than others, it's easy for us to get caught again in saying yes to something and not realizing it until it's irritating, that you got involved with it. And, there's always an opportunity to course correct. And I have to tell you, I read, everyone listening and yourself included, no matter what you think of Phil Collins, I read his biography. He's a great drummer and
Absolutely.
Someone I really, between Genesis and what he did and things outside of both of those parts of his career, a lot of things I didn't know about him, but the big one, what we know about Phil, one thing we all remember about Phil Collins, if we, were there when he was doing any of his work, is he was everywhere to the point of annoyance to a lot of people. And that was because I'm sure he was a nice guy and he was obviously very talented. He was always getting asked to do these really great things, from like working with Eric Clapton to working on the Princess Trust because he knows Princess Diana, and just you name it. And he was just always like, well, I'm not going to get to do that again. But the most interesting part about it, as much as I was going, gosh, well, he can do so much, surely I can do more. But those things kind of destroyed him. His personal life, his health, and man, at the end of the day, that's all we got.
It's true. Yeah.
So
it didn't destroy his career, right? And I guess that's the one thing you can say about that. Whereas it had the opposite effect with Vanilla Ice being omnipresent. It definitely ended up killing his career.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. And we can think of others too. I guess that's a whole podcast dissecting the different artists that did that. So, that were able to be everywhere to the point of annoyance, and the ones that were destroyed because they were everywhere to the point of annoyance.
Yeah. But I definitely want to underscore what you said. Like, if you don't have your health, you don't got anything. If you can't be present, if you're not there, then you got nothing. So definitely take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's one of the tips I heard. I think it was Suze Polinsky, and certainly a bunch of other people, that, as they're creating both content and events and topics to talk about live with music artists, there's a big, seems to be a big movement, rightfully so, and kind of the whole self-care thing. And
yes,
on top of the fact that we can get burned out so easily, I have one thing that's been a recurring theme on the Unstarving Musician podcast, and I'm sure yours is, and not by my doing, but mental health. And I don't know if it's true or not. From the outside looking in, it certainly looks like that in the artistic world, that there are a number of challenges with mental health, depression, and these types of things. So certainly this whole conversation we're having about self-care is super important to maintaining a good state of mental and emotional wellness, so that we can always be creative. And I've also heard, as you probably have, that many artists are kind of afraid to lose the emotional or drama that they might be having in their life for fear it will affect their creativity. But I've seen otherwise, and I'm sure I know many people besides me have seen the same, that if you're in a good headspace, you're going to do your best work.
Yeah, it's kind of a recent observation for me, but I think the other day I came across this list, and it was because of a content piece I was putting together, which was like, should you give up on music? By the way, answer is no. But I found this list on Wikipedia. It was like notable people with major depressive disorder. And the list will absolutely surprise you. There's people like Buzz Aldrin, Second Man on the Moon, might be a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
Drew Carey, Wayne Brady, Eric Clapton, Hulk Hogan. The list goes on. And there's tons of musicians on there too. And it just goes to show you that, like, success, quote unquote, doesn't make you happy. It may bring out parts of you that were always there to confront them, but these people that we think should be happy, are actually, might actually be some of the least happy people, just because of the circumstances they're in, or even maybe mental imbalances potentially.
Yeah. I've been off and on thinking that this should become a bigger part of the Unstarving Musician. I've been really lucky in my lifetime to not have, I can, compared to most people, I can say I've had zero troubles. I've had legitimately a couple of episodes in my life where I was dealing with, what I'll just label minor depression. Nothing I saw anybody for, maybe should have, but in talking to people about it, and having gone through just a little taste of it, it's kind of scary. And I think that awareness is always a good thing, in sharing stories when we can about the times that have been tough for us. And, maybe in the process of doing that, we catch someone at the right time with the right resources to help, themselves outreach for help, or just take advantage of resources that are right in front of them to get better. So
Yeah, I think we just gotta connect with more people, and people are lonely, and it's easier said than done. But that's what's gotta happen is we gotta start shaking hands and going, "Are you okay?" And people will just give you their blanket answer, but you gotta keep digging, right? It's like, "Are you okay?"
yeah, and admittedly, it does feel like a strange world we're in at the moment
Yeah, it
compared to years
does.
past. So that can certainly add to it, and everything from all things digital to political climate and culture. Just I, I I've kind of stopped blaming just politics, but
Yes,
just culturally, people are having a tough time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Such an important topic. But, you mentioned Unstarving Musician, which is a name I really like. And it seems to me we're both passionate about dispelling this pervasive idea that if you're an artist, you must be starving, which is an assumption and sentiment a lot of people still carry. But some people, when they embrace their passion and go all in on their artistic career, they end up exploding. So, what are some things you've seen in this regard? Who do you know that isn't just starving or surviving, but rather thriving?
Shannon Curtis talked about her earlier today, and she does it largely on community and house concerts. She tours every year, and that's all she does, house concerts. And she, is kind of an annual, her and her, with her husband at her side, and the recording process and probably the creative process too. She's releasing music every year, and this is kind of the center point for creating a house concert tour. John Christopher Davis is a guy who's now based in Texas. He spent a lot of years in Nashville, and he's actually in the area in which I have a lot of family now in Texas, in Dallas-Fort Worth. And he's had a ton of success in licensing music, and I'm going to kind of throw him under the bus and say he's not among the young crowd. I'm sure he'd laugh, anymore. He's not really an old guy in the grand scheme of things, but
Yeah.
he still loves, what's going on in music, and it's changed a lot because he's been in the business for quite a while, and he loves performing, and he's busy as all get out, and he's got the right relationships going on. So he's doing really well. Gosh, I should just look at the list of podcasts. There are so many people.
Right.
Oh, there's one that came back into my mind recently. There's a band, Mingo Fish Trap, that is based out of Austin, I believe. And their founder, if I can find him, you might know of them. Let's see. Their founder is Roger Blevins Jr., and he went to school also in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area, but at North Texas, a great music school. And they have carved out a niche in the festival scene for many years. And he's someone I need to reconnect with. He's got he's just one of those people that's seen a lot, done a lot. He knows a lot that I think is helpful to other musicians. I know he participates in songwriter type masterminds, these songwriting groups. I think they have like a songwriters university in his area that they sort of do online collaboration with. And so that's a really cool thing. But I don't know if he's out there sharing all of his great stories and all the, trials and tribulations therein. But yeah, that's a great question. I'm looking at the long list of people that have been on the podcast, and there are just so many. But I guess my answer speaks to one thing, is that there's so many ways to make it in music. To me, Ryan Corella, who I talked to earlier today, was saying there's no better time to be in the music industry. There's so much opportunity. On the other side, I think, man, it's so hard to be in the music industry. You have to do, you have to be so many things. You can't just be the artist anymore, right? So there's two ways to look at it. But one thing's for sure, there's a lot of different ways to create your income and your niche in ways to make it happen. So, and like Ryan says, they're just, if you're resourceful enough, it's all out there for free on the internet. If you need a little extra help in the way of some courses, and I'm one of those guys. I like a good course, that's there. The books are there, your books, my books, and they're just, and tons of super smart people helping people out like you are.
Yeah. Boom. Mic drop. There you go. Yeah, you don't have to be starving at all. And I love what you said about things being kind of bloated and confusing out there. I've seen that in the music entrepreneur space, and I've been in those talks, and I was kind of surprised that what they had for me was this giant mind map, or what they had for their listeners, viewers, attendees, whatever, was this giant mind map of these are all the things you got to do. And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, no, 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 no. It's got to be easier than this. And that's why I'm currently developing the Music Entrepreneur Code. That's all I'm going to say about it right now. But if people want to get on the waiting list, they can go to musicentrepreneurhq.com/code and find out when that's going to become available. Now,
Cool.
you've referenced podcasting, and we both have podcasts, and we've interviewed some of the same people even, which kind of shows you who the squeaky wheels are in the music business. But what was it that made you think podcasting would be the right channel for your message?
Well, while I was thinking about what I was going to do to make this a little bigger, a website was obvious. A blog to me at the time was pretty obvious.
Yes.
And I got involved in a large international community mastermind thing for personal branders. So it really had little or nothing to do with music. Nothing actually. Is really for anybody who wants to niche out a something like helping musicians, or whatever. Maybe you're in the world of education and you want to make life easier for teachers. It didn't matter. But one of the loudest recommendations I got from the mentor ringleader of this whole thing was, Roberto, you need to start a podcast. And I took his advice thinking, well, he's got one. He's obviously building a great business with it. And to me, by the way, that's a good thing, to build a great business about, around what you're doing, whether part of it's trying to help musicians or just to get your music out there. You kind of have to, right? Because if not, you're going to run out of gas at some point. So he says, you got to start a podcast. And I did. And I found out immediately after getting through maybe the first couple of interviews and I probably did then too. My first one was a big disaster, but I loved it. And I found inspiration in one podcaster and then a couple that are, kind of big league podcasters in the art of the interview. So that's what really inspired me. And the more podcasters I talk to, or the more podcasts that I get exposed to and kind of check out, there's so many directions for growth or for rebranding that are out there. And somebody told me the number of podcasts that are out in the U.S. just this week, and it's a huge number. But we also are hearing that it's still at an early stage. So
Yeah.
That's why I got into it, and I find it to be a lot of fun. But it's not going to be everybody's jam. Some of the musicians that you and I talk to need to start a YouTube channel because that's their jam. Podcasting is a ton of fun for me. I would like to become more of a YouTube or a video kind of guy. And in fact, I have to. It's on the radar. I want to start putting out my own performance content, and I would love, to have an occasional thing where people can see conversations like ours today live, doing some live streaming. So yeah, little steps at a time.
Yeah, and I can definitely see this podcast space continuing to grow. I think it is challenging. Like, I've seen a gradual uptick in my listenership recently, which is great. But it was a long stagnation there for a while, sitting at about 1,000 listeners per month. And it's like, well, that's great. I'm just wondering if it should keep going with this thing, because it doesn't seem to be growing. And well, it's always validating to see those numbers continue to go up and change. But I think sometimes it's also easy to take for granted that, like, you have a reach of 1,000 people, and you're like, oh, that's actually pretty significant when you stop and think about it.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if you know this, but at just 1,000 listeners per episode, you're percentage-wise hugely far and away above all the rest of the podcasters. So if you're podcasting and you're at that level, you're doing great. And not everybody has to be Joe Rogan or pick your podcaster that's like one of the most famous in the world. So we just need to be engaged. Same as when we play our music, when we create our music, engagement is our friend. And same thing with podcasting. I heard a great, by the way, on engagement, if I can throw this out there.
Yeah.
Ryan Corella was sharing a story. See if I can find her name while I'm sharing it with you. But we were on the thread of live broadcasting, video streaming, and the great opportunities it provides to musicians these days. Mary Ambers, who I believe he talked about, she's doing big things. I think he said on Twitch or Stage It. But like her, and I've had a guest on my podcast that's done very much the same. She's doing everything from writing her songs going through the writing process in a live stream, asking for suggestions for anything as small as I need a word to rhyme with whatever, fill in the blank, while she's live streaming, and actually letting her fans collaborate with her. I've had a guest that has done that. She's had guests help her choose songs from those she's working on, to vote which ones they like best for her upcoming release. They work with her on the cover art and various other aspects, and that's pretty amazing. So I think, podcasting can be this way as well. But what a cool thing, though. He got me pretty excited about the whole live stream thing. It's something I want to explore with my guests in the future, and it gave me food for thought in my own new chapter in music.
Yeah. Right now, Instagram Live is a big thing. I had a friend who came to me and said, well, I'm going to start doing lives on Facebook. And I had just spent probably the better part of 5-6 months experimenting with Facebook's lives. And I was like, dude, you got to move on over to Instagram, because based on my testing and my experiences, Facebook Live is no longer where it's at. And he was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do it on Facebook because technologically it just makes more sense for me to start there. But then I'm gonna distribute it to Instagram. I said, great, do that for sure.
Yeah, Instagram video is all the rage, and this is gonna sound weird, but to some people, not to everyone, but LinkedIn video, and I know it's going to sound weird. But yeah, it's going to sound weird, right, to some people, because that's not for musicians. That's for people looking for jobs to some people. But think about, if you're not there, think about how you can or should be, because LinkedIn videos at in its infancy stage, kind of like Facebook was at once upon a time, or maybe Instagram is right now. So it's a great place to get your message out on video.
Yeah, I think you got to get on there too, beyond LinkedIn. There's a lot of opportunities, and people, the video engagement has been really good.
And a growing number of industry professionals out there too, and these people are great to. I'm learning more reasons why industry pros are great to connect with. When I first started, I just considered myself a musician. I do. First and foremost, I consider myself a musician, an author, a content creator. But I figure slowly but surely I'm kind of falling into what I consider industry, in that, I'm an educator, right? To a degree, and maybe someday I'll just be full-fledged. But, when I was just looking at myself as a musician, I really was thinking, I just want to talk to musicians. I don't really need to talk to the industry people, but there's so much that they have to offer just in terms of information, because they're talking to and working with a ton of musicians.
Yes.
And most of these folks really, really, really love helping musicians. Some of them are musicians, some of them not so much. Some of them are self-admittedly crappy musicians, but they just love music and love musicians. And wow, I'm kind of getting slapped in the face recently with what great friends and partners they can potentially be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's a lot that can be learned from that. And it depends on who you talk to too. Like, some of them are going to be a little more traditional and conventional in their approach and what they talk about, and it may not end up applying to some independent musicians. And then there's others who are looking to the future and looking to the possibilities of streaming and online marketing and everything else that's going on in the world. So you can get different perspectives that way.
Yep, totally. Love it. And from different genres, I suppose, too. A genre that I'm kind of excited about. I've had a love-hate relationship with it forever, but DJs. Yes. And one of my former guests, who's going to be, I'm going to do a follow-up interview with pretty soon, but I got to meet her in Nashville in person. Her name is Notel, and she's kind of grown up she's a singer. I consider her a singer first and foremost. She's a songwriter, but she's been immersed in the DJ world for a long time. And when I met with her in Nashville just last week, she was telling me she just came from a recording session. She was putting together, get this, and it was new to me. Maybe it's not to you, but she was working on a product that would be distributed to the DJ community for use as samples. So it was a lot of vocal stuff with some music overlay. So I was imagining, I still don't, I'm real interested in speaking with her more about it, but what I'm kind of imagining is, she's got this digital product or maybe physical as well, and it's got probably snippets of things, kind of like when you go into a garage band or something and you find these, license free or whatever, royalty free music options that you can use for podcasting for those who are familiar and can make that comparison. But that was yet another way to make, to put your career together, another income stream, but a really cool and exciting thing I was unfamiliar with. And again, she turned me on to some DJs to check out. And I've seen a couple that I'm like, that person seems pretty artistic. And I've seen some with, what was that band, Incubus? I don't know if they're still around, but they had a guy that I consider, a DJ on stage with them. And he was brilliant, in this rock band. So there are certainly all kinds of applications. And I know there's some crappy ones, of course, but it's something I'm more interested in these days.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And, there was that entire period of kind of the hybrid hip hop band, pop band, rock band sort of thing, Linkin Park, or even Sugar Ray to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I think Incubus might still be going at this point. I've been compared to them, or some of my music has been compared to them, which is kind of cool. I guess I have a little bit of that alternative vibe. I recently, I wouldn't say like I came back to music, but I've started making more music than I did in the past, and
good for you.
Planning out a new album for 2020 and that kind of thing. But I think it all came from something podcast guests recently shared with me, off air, as it were, and he was like, "Hey, I went and listened to your Fire Your God recording. It says it's released in 2018, but is that new?" And I was like, "No, it's actually not. I think I first released it in 2011." And he's like, "Well, something I just wanted to tell you. It kind of makes me think of John Frusciante. Have you listened to his stuff?" And so I've had that comparison before too, but I hadn't sat there and listened to John Frusciante. And then when I did, it's like he actually has quite a few, raw, unpolished, demo-esque recordings. And I was like, oh, well, if someone like him is doing it, certainly I can too.
Yeah, what a great artist too. Now that you said that, I need to go listen to some of his solo work.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll wrap this up here shortly, but another medium you've chosen for your message is a book. It's fair to say that there are many people in this space with a book, but it can be a massive undertaking. And while it establishes your credibility and authority, like getting it read can be even more of an intensive uphill climb. So what made you want to write a book, and what has the impact of that been?
I've always enjoyed writing, and it's a quick read, but still creating even a quick read is for the first time feels like a monumental task. And then I did the self-publish route. And I would imagine whether you're doing self-publishing or traditional, there's still a lot to learn, right? Mm-hmm. So there was all that, and then there's the sigh of relief when I finally, put the last period on the page, or right at the end, whatever. And then realizing, oh crap, now I have to start working to get it out there. So it was the story. It was the idea that I have kind of a cool story about what this whole being a subbing, a musician, a gigging musician, and a drummer, and a busy one who's gotten to work with a lot of wonderful people that I want to share, because I'd seen some of my peers around me struggle with something that was coming to me pretty easy. So I figured, there's more people out there that struggle. And so I put it together, and it did take a little while. I would like to actually improve upon it with a second edition, and I've slowly started working on that. And the title of it was to lend itself to a series so that I could have an Unstarving Musician's Guide to Fill in the Blank. The first one was about getting paid gigs. So that, was the initial intention. But I've just done the one, and, speaking of that, I was looking, you've published a few, So
Yes.
that inspires me to get back out and write, or get to it, so to speak. But you and I were also talking about paid paid work to create content. I've had some of those
Yes.
opportunities come across my desk recently, so
That's
I'm
fantastic.
taking it. Yeah, and I'm taking advantage of those, and the work is interesting, and will help me with the economics of keeping the Unstarving Musician going for now. So something that I felt compelled to do. But yeah, I'm meeting with another writer on a regular basis, to a couple actually, a workshop and in a workshop environment and a mastermind environment, to keep myself going. But yeah, they're a great business card, right? And
They
they're one
are.
of the things. Yeah, and if you're a musician and or a podcaster, or you're just a podcaster, or you're whatever, if you have a book, that's a great way for you to ask your community to support you. Pick up a copy of my book. It's available on Amazon and all the other platforms via kobo.com, or however you're selling it. And speaking of which, I almost forgot. I've been really bad about this. I sponsored an event recently, for Suze Polinsky of Rockstar Advocates, and I in celebration of the event, I put the book on sale for the first time. So I don't have the prices right in front of me, but I think it's like $3.99 for the paperback and $2.99 for the Kindle on Amazon and Kobo. And Kobo is just a place where you can get it on all the other electronic platforms.
Yes.
And that's through this month. So if you happen to, I don't know if anybody's going to hear this before then. I should have asked that. But if they do, or maybe something that gets mentioned in the show notes. So that was kind of a big deal for me. But the bigger thing, getting back to, if you have a book or you're thinking about a book, it's a great way for you, for your people, your tribe, your fans, your patrons, your supporters, to support you in whatever work you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do have 4 books now, and rest assured there are more coming. But I think, I was here worried about automation and AI beginning to take over content work, which I guess to some extent it is, like producing business reports and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think this is actually the most lucrative time to be in content creation. So if you are a writer, or if you want to get into that work or have a little bit of side income, now's the time to get into it. It's big. Are there any books or other resources that have helped you on your journey?
Well, as a podcaster, the smart, well, I shouldn't say the podcast, but the person, Pat Flynn,
Pat
was a
Flynn.
big inspiration. Yeah.
That was an early one for me too.
Tim Ferriss was a big inspiration. He was also helped by Pat Flynn, by the way, but
Yeah.
he was a big inspiration because I like his interview style, and his the topic is always superb. Mark Maron has been a big inspiration. Other reasons, man, I'm getting inundated with smart people and smart content these days. And so, I think I'm at a point, though, where I should zero in on some stuff that's really related to music, and some of the conversations I'm having as of late with the, air quotes, music industry people. I think that I'm going to be digging into those relationships more, to ask them questions, ask for help, try to be of value to them, because I know they'll help me, and they'll help me help other musicians, and you'll see. I'll be sharing those things always on unstarvingmusician.com, and I know you do the same on your website. So that's one of the many places that you can find great information and resources if you're a gigging musician or a songwriter or somebody who's whatever, just trying to get the needle to move a little bit.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I know you've got other calls and podcast recordings and other things to hop on here, so we'll let you go. But thank you so much for your time and generosity, Robonzo. Is there anything else I should have asked?
No, man, I think you covered it quite well, and I just want to say it was a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity. I want more people to know about the Unstarving Musician and the podcast especially, and talking with you today was a great opportunity to for people to learn about it. So thanks.
You got it. And people can go to unstarvingmusician.com, right?
Yep, that's the one.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
Yeah, man, appreciate you.
All right.
Thank you for listening. Music in this episode was brought to you by Brian Young. Wherever you're listening to this right now, please consider leaving a 5-star review and comment to help us get the word out about the podcast.